Hi, and welcome to the third day, our final day of the ParisPeace Forum. I truly hope you have caught up with everything that has gone down in the first day and the second day and are as excited for the third day as we are. Some of the key takeaways from day two of the forum was the official ceremony that we had with the heads of state. We had bold declarations put forward by President Macron, by Macky Sall, as well as Christina Georgieva and Charles Michel. They presented the priorities on how to respond to the post-COVID world, with a special emphasis on ensuring that everyone has access to vaccines, regardless of which country you belong to. So that was a critical takeaway for us. Another big win for ParisPeace Forum was the Finance and Commons Summit, which put out a bold declaration, again, doubling down on the need for gender equality. Remy Roux, the head, said that they will ask all public development banks to ensure that they have a gender equality focused lens on everything that they do. So we are excited about the impact of that. Coming to today, what can we expect? One of the key highlights of today's day is going to be the Christchurch call. It was in response to the attacks that happened in New Zealand, and it is a joint collaboration by New Zealand and France and many other critical stakeholders, where they are focusing on removing videos of terrorists as soon as they appear on any digital platform. We will also hear from the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. And finally, we have some great projects for you that are being pitched during the day. I encourage you to contact the project leaders, set up video calls with them, and get to know more about their project, and also how you can help them expand the scope and impact of the work. A few projects that have been of particular interest to me, one of them being the passport for qualifications of refugees and migrants. This is an interesting project put forward by UNESCO, which recognizes the need for education qualifications, as well as recognizing work experience and language proficiency skill sets that refugees have that are assets when they are hosted in countries. And we have seen this more than ever during the COVID crisis, with a large population of people with refugee status coming forward and offering their skills, their education, and wanting to serve along with other brave frontline warriors. So this, we hope, is going to be a really interesting project. A few projects that we have that are fighting disinformation within the COVID context are the International Fact-Checking Network's Coronavirus Facts, as well as the Coronavirus Facts led by UNESCO and other international organizations, and Inform and Protect, led by the European Commission Service for Foreign Policy Instruments. So once again, welcome to the third day of ParisPeace Forum. Don't forget to join the conversations by using the hashtag ParisPeaceForum 2020. And we hope you can let us know what were your expectations and what are the conversations that have particularly moved you and inspired you to take action during these trying times. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's debate, which is about the values of artificial intelligence, bringing ethics to the table. I'm Nick Vinocour. I'm a technology editor for Politico in Europe, and I'm delighted to host this session with our guests, Borut Pahor, President of the Republic of Slovenia, Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO, Professor Stuart RUSSELL, Professor of Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley, Bertrand Braunschweig, Director of the Paris Center for Expertise, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. in Paris, and Professor Stéphanie Lollet-Chaoulou, Professor of European Law and Reform at the University of Centre of Lancashire, the Cyprus campus. Thanks everybody for joining in. Today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, which has been presented as the crucial technological issue in the world today, which is set to transform just about everything we do, from how we work to our health and even our everyday lives. But it also raises a great deal of questions about values. Where do we set the limits on the use of artificial intelligence? Where do we set the limits on privacy? Where do we set the limits on surveillance? Where do we set limits on the way in which artificial intelligence is used to help maintain our health? And on this, has been work going on for the last few years. There is work going on at UNESCO to develop global standards around artificial intelligence. And there's also work going on at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development via the Global Partnership for AI. But what we're here to do today is to drill down on some of these subjects and talk about what it actually means to bring ethics into this race to develop artificial intelligence technology. And I want to start with you, Mr. President, if I may, President of Slovenia. We're still meeting here at a distance. The pandemic is still going on. And what we've seen in this pandemic is an explosion, an acceleration in the use of artificial intelligence. We've seen it, to take one example, on social media. Artificial intelligence was brought in to moderate content simply because the human moderators could not be safe in their offices, so machines took over. And there are many other examples of how artificial intelligence has more or less accelerated in this time. I want to ask you if you think that if we have been keeping up, if this acceleration, this rush to deploy artificial intelligence has created ethical worries for us, and whether the pace of change is keeping up with the pace of our setting standards and principles for artificial intelligence.
Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to be with you. Thanks to digital technologies. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this interesting panel. As you said, the pandemic made us much more aware of the advantages of these new technologies in all spheres of our lives. Digitalization seems to be some sort of a solution of today's world troubles. New technologies, including artificial intelligence, can indeed help us a lot, but as you can mention, can also harm us. It really depends on us in which direction we will go. The companies that invest more in digitalization will come out of this crisis in better shape. We have a unique opportunity to modernize our education and other sectors of public services. I see artificial intelligence as a tool for a better life, a tool to win over the pandemic, a tool to develop our economies, a tool also to achieve sustainable development goals. For this to happen, we need to develop a human-centered approach to artificial intelligence and address legal, as you said, ethical, economic, and other implications of these technologies. Let me mention that my country, Slovenia, is highly ambitious here, with long tradition in artificial intelligence research, with hosting the first UNESCO center, by being a founding member of Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, and chairing Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence. So we are already contributing to a common knowledge and We wish to do more. We are very much in favor of transparency, multilateralism, and cooperation. Now, back to your question. The development of artificial intelligence and machine learning has gone already very far, and we are lagging behind with legal and ethical principles. It is a fact that we are very vulnerable to algorithms. Big parts of big data are centralized and are functioning in closed business models. That is why it is so important, for example, to promote open sources. We know that new technologies are used for also manipulation, surveillance, distribution of fake use, and all that stuff. In short, they represent in a way a threat to our democracies. However, one has to be fair. Many of these trends have been there for a long time. New technologies have only accelerated them. But again, it is up to us how we use new technologies. Let me mention two examples: democracy and climate change. When it comes to climate change, artificial intelligence endangers the environment with energy consumption and waste. On the other hand, artificial intelligence can contribute to reduced energy consumption, allow for more efficient monitoring of environment and its pollution, improve waste management, and so on and so on. Regarding political and societal impact of artificial intelligence, again, it can harm our democracies by mass surveillance, manipulation, culture of, already mentioned fake news and all that stuff, concentration of power, we will see. On the other hand, I am a strong believer in technology. Artificial intelligence can be used for better and more democratized public services, better education, better access to for information. Let me conclude by saying that I sincerely believe in the power of science, and I also believe that we are able to find answers to challenges of society, of science and technology.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So following on that, we're here to talk about global initiatives and some of the work that's being done to lay out ethical principles to govern the development of this technology. I want to turn to you, Ms. Ramos, Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. Firstly, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the work that's being done over the past couple of years to develop global standards for AI. I believe this is the first sort of construction site on a global level where this is taking place. But I also want to ask you a bit more of a provocative question. It seems like on AI, there hasn't really been a global consensus on even sort of simple questions, things like to use a buzzword, killer robots. Just as simple an issue as making sure, agreeing that there should always be a human in the loop when we take decisions over life and death of a person in the battlefield. So I want to ask, what is are you hopeful that we'll be able to set certain minimum standards at the global level of what we expect on artificial intelligence?
Very good question. But let me tell you that the time is ripe for the ethical framing of these technologies. The president mentioned it. The fact that you have a massive movement to digital because of COVID, where countries that used to have 7% coverage of teleworking are now at 40, 50, 60. The massive data gathering is putting again at the table the ethical question. And you are right, there are very different views of how to regulate this. Regulators are always lagging behind on these technologies. It has always been the case in all the economic sectors, but it is more in this sector that is moving at such a fast pace. But I feel that the fact that our societies are looking at these issues very closely, and that the impact of what can happen if we don't have the ethical framework is so blatantly present, that I feel that the time is ripe, as I said, and the political will, at least from the members of UNESCO, which is universal, because there were 193 countries that in 2019 asked UNESCO to develop a recommendation on ethics of artificial intelligence. When you were not even able, I was the Sherpa to the G20, and you were not even able to mention the word ethics when you refer to these technologies. So I feel that we need to take advantage of the fact that COVID is providing us with this environment in which the non-regulatory coordination, the non-regulatory elements that we need for this to operate in an ethical way need to be put together. And that's why at UNESCO, we're so proud to be granted with this mandate in the context of all the UN system. UNESCO is the one that had been asked to look at the ethical issues. And this is because we have been there for a long time. We were the first institution that took about the science, the ethics of science in the genome 3 decades ago. We are the institution that launched the Rome principles for universality of internet. And we're also looking at, at education and all of the areas that are related to human rights. So what we're doing now, we're putting the ethical question and saying, technologies are great. We love these technologies. I think that they are really showing how much benefit they can bring to humankind. But they need to be developed in a way that will enhance human rights and human dignity. And this is the framing that we are putting in the recommendation. 24 high-level experts put together all the framing, but it's with very strong language. We don't dare to call spade a spade and to talk about what kind of rights need to be defended, including the gender equality, but many other issues related to discrimination and biases that we know that can be present in these technologies. We are talking about values, human-centric. We're talking about living in harmony. We're talking about, as I said, human dignity. But then we also move with the recommendation, not only with this political call that is so important because we need to frame it like that, but we move to very concrete principles that we feel are not well served in the current framework, principles of accountability. Who is accountable when these technologies deliver something that is wrong? Who is accountable when they are misused, plainly misused? We have no international rule that really help us to put accountability at the center. And you have seen it because of the legal actions that are being taken in the US or in Europe, tell you that this is the mood in terms of being close and how do we apply these principles: accountability, transparency, privacy, proportionality, and all of these principles are included in the recommendation. But then, because there is a lot of action in this field of the regulatory framework, what happened is that us building up now this instrument, we wanted to make it effective. And being effective, we also included very concrete policy actions on data governance that is still in the making with very diverse views. Policy actions related to education, to communications, to culture, to the areas where UNESCO is strong, but also policy actions in promoting diversity, inclusiveness. There was a very strong call because we built this with the participation of very large group of all the consultations around the world and also with our members. And the fact is they put a lot of emphasis on gender, and there are very concrete measures to reduce the gap of gender participation in these technologies and incidence and influence. And then the question of the environment and how these technologies will help us with the climate change, and also to measure the footprint of these technologies. And finally, something that makes me very excited is not only about the framing, is not only about the universality of this instrument in UNESCO, is the fact that we're also being asked to produce something very concrete, which is an ethical impact assessment, a tool that will tell us when these technologies are being deployed in a way that is not ethical. We are asked to look at the divergence in terms of level of readiness by countries, and we're also asked to produce benchmarks. And I feel that this is very important because right now, we know that bias is one of the main problems of these technologies. If we have data sets that are biased or algorithms that are biased, we will deliver biased outcomes, but we don't even have an international definition of what is biased. And we don't know how to measure it. We don't know how to track it. So these things, I believe, is something that UNESCO is going to contribute with our members. and I feel will be really delivering. And we're working with all the members. We're working with GPAC. We're working with the OECD, which is a great partner. So I feel we will be delivering something interesting.
Many thanks. Yeah, and we'll get back to those recommendations. I want to turn to you, Professor Stuart Russell. I don't know if you're tuning in from California or somewhere closer, but in any case, you are in a way a representative, let's say for today, of Silicon Valley, because you're out there on the U.S. West Coast where a lot of this technology is. Not, let's say, Silicon Valley geographically, not in any way, but that's certainly where a lot of these cutting edge technologies are being developed. And we're hearing about ethical frameworks, we're hearing about principles, and I just want to ask you, do you think that these frameworks or principles will have any impact on the way that these technologies are actually being developed in the research labs of some of these major companies? As far as I've seen, having spoken to them, there tends to be a resistance to the idea that we're going to rule out any particular practice. We're not going to rule out, for example, the idea of an autonomous robot that could take a life-ending decision on a battlefield or do things like that. So that's my question to you. What do you think the real-world sort of impact of these frameworks is?
So that's a great question. I could give you a very short answer, a two-letter answer. But since you mentioned autonomous weapons, I can't resist talking about those first, because there are some very good ethical arguments why we should ban autonomous weapons, having to do with human dignity and degrading the value of human life in general. And there are actually some corporations that would support a ban. So BAE Systems, which is one of the biggest weapons manufacturers in the world, Sir Roger Carr, who's the chairman, promised that BAE would never make autonomous weapons because they're, quote, fundamentally wrong. So there is an ethical case to make there, and I think we may be able to move forward a little bit. But the real reason to ban them is actually a practical one, not an ethical one. And the practical reason is that they are scalable weapons of mass destruction. And what that means is that because they don't need a human to supervise the killing, even a small group could launch millions of them simultaneously and wipe out a whole city or even wipe out an entire ethnic group in a country. So I don't know that anyone thinks this is a good idea, but there are some countries, the US, Russia, the UK, who actually seem to believe that it's a good idea because they are actively opposing a ban. Okay, so that was my little piece about autonomous weapons. But back to the question of rules that corporations will accept. So first of all, I reject that idea altogether because we don't need their permission to make laws. We get to make the laws. We don't have to ask their permission to do so. And I think it's also the case that some corporations want rules with real teeth, because what happens when you don't have rules is that if you don't act unethically, you go out of business. And Microsoft is one example. They have actually asked to be regulated because they really don't want to have to act unethically to take people's data without asking, to advertise in ways that they find distasteful and so on. But the point you make about the ethical principles, and there are several hundred sets of ethical principles that have been proudly announced, and I was very glad to hear from Gabriela that UNESCO is going beyond principles to real concrete policy and regulations. Most of these ethical principles have no teeth whatsoever. So nothing is illegal, there are no penalties, and as the Americans say, it's motherhood and apple pie. So I think we have to begin somewhere, and one rule that I think is gaining some traction is to ban the impersonation of human beings, which means that whenever I'm communicating with another entity, I know whether it's a machine or a person. It doesn't, it could look exactly like Nicholas Winokur or Gabriela Ramos, but if it's a machine, it has to tell me that it's a machine. And that's a legal obligation, and it prevents deception. And it's also a sort of a fundamental human right, because we owe a duty of time and politeness and honesty to other human beings, and we don't owe anything to other machines. And so by deceiving us, you're actually infringing on our fundamental rights. And it's already a law in California. In some circumstances, you have to declare your status as a machine. And some people say it's hiding in GDPR as well. I think that's a question for the lawyers to answer. But it's hard to see how you could really defend impersonation as a business practice. And I think, rather than waiting for some overarching legal theory of AI, I think we just have to draw a line and say no, on behalf of the human race, no, we're not going that way. So that's a place to start. I think privacy is another area where the market is completely broken. Users have no choice in the matter. They're not exercising free choice in a market. It's basically, you agree to this 43-page contract or your phone's going to stop working tomorrow. And this is not good. But if you look at other industries, which used to thrive on massive quantities of small print, like the financial industry, credit cards and so on, we developed laws. We said, no, small print 28-page contract is not good. You have to have in big print clear disclosure of the terms, the interest rate, the fees, and so on. And they're very, very scrupulous about complying with these laws. So we could do something similar with privacy. Basically, we could say, look, there's clear disclosure. There's maybe 3 levels of standard privacy, right? There could be, red, which means no privacy at all. We're going to sell your data to the kidney stealers. Yellow, meaning we'll keep your data within the corporation, within the entity with whom you're having this conversation. And green would mean that it's completely oblivious, meaning that the machine will forget that this conversation ever occurred. And every browser would just tell you, by the frame around the window, what privacy contract is in force for that interaction. So we can pass a law saying that, right? And non-compliance would mean losing your ability to connect to the internet. I think another big issue I'm worried about is the way that algorithms, particularly on social media, the content selection algorithms interact with human beings. So there are things called reinforcement learning algorithms, which sort of do what they sound like. They learn from reinforcement, from rewards and punishments. And they learn how to recommend news items or videos to watch or whatever. And for those algorithms, the reward is the long-term profit of the company. And you might think that they do it, the algorithms maximize profit by sending us stuff that we're interested in, or even stuff that we might benefit from. But that's actually not what they do. What they do is they send sequences of content that modify our brains so that we become more predictable, which means more monetizable. And this is just a mathematical consequence of the way the algorithm is designed. It's not a, I don't think it's a sinister plot to take over the world's brains. It's just how the algorithms work. And we wouldn't let drug companies sell untested products that are designed to produce long-term psychological changes. So I don't see why we should allow tech companies to do it. So it might need some rules like Gabriela's ethical impact assessment, basically measuring the effect on users of long-term exposure to different kinds of algorithms, and maybe restrict the types that can be used, because some types of algorithms are going to manipulate people just from their fundamental operation. So, so no impersonation, standardized privacy contracts, no manipulation. I think we could get agreement on those. And there are other areas. I think face recognition is a very active topic of discussion. Disinformation has already been mentioned. Fairness has been mentioned, deepfakes. So all of these are not going to have market solutions. I think we have to have laws. And again, we don't need the company's permission to make those laws.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. I want to reassure everyone, I'm not impersonating. I'm an actual human being, as is everyone else on the session. You've raised some truly, you've gone right to the heart of the matter here. And I'm turning now to Bertrand Braunschweig, who so recently was director of the Paris Center of Expertise and is working for the Global Partnership on AI. And just for a reminder, that's a global forum with OECD countries that is developing some standards and a framework, an ethical framework on AI. And it's exceptional in the sense that the United States is a participant. It's one of the only multilateral frameworks that the Trump administration has chosen to join. And in that sense, it does appear sort of quite significant. And I just want to go back to some of the, to a point that Professor Russell made just now about, if you don't have a framework, well, in that case, companies or countries in this sense are incentivized to develop the most far-reaching technology that they could possibly have. And we're very much in a geopolitical race at the moment, if you will, between the United States, China on the other hand, and somewhere in the middle, the European Union trying to sort of go for supremacy. So Mr. Russell, Mr. Braunschweig, how do you think that, these standards, will countries in a forum like GPI agree to limit their own technological development, knowing that this could somehow disadvantage them in this global race? What sort of perspective for hope do you see there? And also, since we're at it, do you think that around any of these principles that we just mentioned, banning the impersonation of human beings, having basic requirements for privacy, and the impact assessment on algorithms, is there already work going on? Is there a hope for some kind of international agreement at the GPI level? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a very interesting question. First, I would like to give a precision because, as you said, I have been interim director of the Paris Center of Expertise of the GPI, the Global Partnership on AI, in the last months and so, and I was interim director and I left the position 2 weeks ago. But still, of course, I've been involved in the setting up of GPI in the last 2 years, so I still remember, of course, what we are doing. It's very interesting because behind GPI, you have a group of, at the moment, 14 countries and the European Union, and they are together and they have produced common documents. So it means that they are really motivated to developing these recommendations that we are talking about. So we hope that this will lead to practical results. And of course, the countries are extremely supportive of that. However, of course, the GPI will only produce, let's say, results of project recommendations, and so it will be open to the different countries and other actors, private actors, public actors, civil society, etc., to decide what to do with them. But at least there is support from 15 very large countries and the European Union together. Maybe I would like to go back a little bit in history to tell about how things happened. In fact, 2 or 3 years ago, the idea of this GPI was starting to appear with discussions between Canada and France. And it really started, I would say, 2 years ago with a number of declarations and commitments. And 1 year ago, we organized in Paris, approximately 1 year ago, the Global Forum on AI for Humanity, which was identified as the launch pad for the GPI. And so we gathered 400 experts for 2 days, 3 days in fact, to discuss about all these important topics for AI. And from that, and from there on, there was still some discussions on how to organize this initiative, which really started, in fact, in the middle of this year, in last June. So it's a very young organization. It was, as I said, initiated by France and Canada, with a number of other countries supportive but not really engaged. And it was only in the beginning of this year that this group of countries came together and to really decide to do it. So now, another important point for the Global Partnership on AI is that it wants to be a project-based organization, meaning, of course, it will produce documents, recommendations, reports, but it should be based on real concrete projects which are testing, assessing the different principles and ideas that people are putting together. And so this is something that is maybe slightly different from other initiatives. And people in the different working groups are now discussing about what are exactly the projects that they want to launch in the future. The working groups that have been started with GPA are on very interesting, important topics on responsible artificial intelligence, all the questions of fairness, transparency, explainability, control, accountability, etc. That's one big subject. There is a working group on the data governance, looking at the data governance frameworks, how data is used in the development of artificial intelligence and what it means to when people don't have access to the appropriate data for building their applications. There is a working group on the future of work. This is a big question. What will happen to workers with the development of artificial intelligence? And so it's looking at how AI is used at work at the moment. It's looking at topics like training with AI, training of AI. There is a working group on what we call innovation and commercialization. What does it mean to take research and put it into commercialized products? What are the necessary conditions? What are the developments that are needed to do that? So what are the new business models that are impacted by AI? How can we deal with those important questions of certification and auditing, reliability, which are essential in particular for critical systems which are critical for health, critical for the economy, critical for life in general, critical for industry. It's also looking at very interesting issues of human-computer interaction. And I think my colleague Stuart could also talk a lot about human-computer interaction and the difficulty that is associated with this. And so, the fifth working group that we have is has been created specifically to see what AI can do for the current pandemics and for the future pandemics, looking at the tools, etc. So this is what we are trying to do. This is done in a complementary manner with the OECD. OECD has been associated with the GPI. OECD is plays the role of secretariat of the GPI. And so this means that we are really looking at the convergence of both organizations, with OECD more looking at regulations and politics aspects, and GPI, as I said, working on practical and project-based research. Generally speaking, as we already said, there is a number of initiatives of this sort. In fact, there have been some studies quoting something like 100 different documents on the ethics of AI, or even the last number that I got from a GPI working group is more than 200. And so, including many different countries. For example, there are the Beijing AI principles, which have been established in China, which are also worth looking at. And so, altogether, we see that there is at least a number of common motivations, things like fairness, transparency, explainability, accountability, privacy, etc., which are more or less supported by everyone. And so we hope, we think that, as I said, with the support of 150 scientists or experts from all over the world and the countries behind them, the recommendations have a chance to be applied. Maybe I would like to complete with some other remarks about what it means really for technology and research, because things that we are asking at the moment are not so obvious and need a lot of research to be dealt with, but maybe I keep that for the next part of the discussion.
Well, we're gonna circle back to you. I want to make sure we get to everyone as we go along. I want to turn to you, Professor Stéphanie Chailloux. So you're an expert in European law, and one of the things we're talking about here is grand international principles. But it so happens that in the EU, we are working on actual legal framework for the development of artificial intelligence. And I want to ask you, do you think that, it is necessary, even as we establish these international principles and frameworks for countries or regions to go ahead and say, well, we want to go a step further and develop actual rules for artificial intelligence, and how could this become an advantage in this global race to develop artificial intelligence technology that we're talking about?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I have the privilege of being the last one to speak. So it's a privilege because, of course, I have heard all distinguished speakers and I can adjust and complement. So I was very pleased to see much emphasis on the legal rules, but I think I will be a little bit more skeptical about it. To start with. So in the context of artificial intelligence, I think it's very difficult to distinguish ethical, legal, and societal issues and challenges, and that it's actually quite dangerous to do so. For the very least, it would be ineffective. So I think we all agree that we are looking at the same principles, whether we call them legal principles or ethical principles, and at all levels. So legal issues that are relevant to the discussion are around rights and freedoms, primarily along the data protection, privacy, dignity, that was mentioned quite a few times, of course, equality, non-discrimination, the right to life and other human rights, as well as socio-economic rights, including education, which we have not really spoken about yet. And these are completed by what we lawyers call principles of good governance, but what other people call ethical principles. So these are principles of fairness, transparency, accountability, prohibition or at least minimization of biases, prevention or reduction of harm, respect for human rights, democracy, democratic governance, human autonomy, the rule of law, and human safety. So these are principles that we have worked on in the Sherpa project, and we have produced not only a mapping out of all legal frameworks, especially in the European Union, but also we have produced ethical guidelines, and we are in the making of recommendations, and the recommendations are in line with what other speakers on this panel have referred to. So it's also very much the case in the GDPR that was mentioned already. A lot of very strong legal principles and legal rules mapped or dressed in ethical dimensions, with strong rights being provided, strict governance principles and processes for the European Union. So this is important. Also, if you look at the latest initiatives at the EU level, for example, there is now on the table a proposal for regulation on ethical principles for the development, deployment and use of AI, robotics and related technologies, which is in October 2020. So very recent proposal for regulation. So this proposed regulation again works around a mixture of legal rules and ethical principles. So the legal rules are, or the legal principles are, that there must be full human oversight. and that there must be a possibility to regain human control over those technologies. There is a focus in this regulation on high-risk technologies, which are defined, and a focus on human-centric and human-made AI. So we go back to the conventional principles that we have already spoken about, such as safety, transparency, accountability, social responsibility, gender equality, environmental sustainability, respect for privacy, and protection of personal data. And this proposed regulation also embeds some processes, so legal processes if you want, such as rights to redress, which exist in the GDPR, risk assessments that also exist in the GDPR, compliance assessments that also exist, certification and standardization that are important governance tools, network of national supervisory authorities, and coordination at the EU level. So these are key terms that appear to be making circles everywhere across the globe, and they summarize quite well the need for a mixture of approaches. So it cannot be too hard, it cannot be too soft. So there must be a mixture of hard and soft law provisions that are usually based on ethical considerations and must be embedded into policy making. And this is where is the difficulty. So there are several ways that this can be achieved. One way would be the rule-based approach, which is very much what was mentioned before, so there should be strict rules. But another way is the ethics by design approach, whereby you take into account those ethical considerations from the very beginning, on the very making of technologies. There are many reasons why this is the case, that we need this hybrid approach, including reasons of legal certainty and power struggle, as you mentioned already. So overall, let's say that any framework, whether at the EU level or the global level, would need a good dose of realism and should be accompanied by a robust enforcement mechanism. And this is probably where the EU gains its advantage or some ground, because there is willingness, or provided there is willingness on the parts of all actors, which is states, but also the industry and the consumers, to abide to these principles. So this requires some sort of coercive powers, and coercive powers must be at the level of the international organizations and other fora, such as the ones we just heard about today, so that countries can be globally coerced to follow or comply. So it's not necessarily to comply with rules, it could be to follow guidelines. Legal safeguards at the global level could therefore be dressed in soft law or ethical principles, but they must be accompanied by an enforcement process. So the GDPR in the EU, as well as the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union, which was alluded to before, have had an impact on the transfer of data between the US and the EU, and have obliged US companies to comply with such rules on the EU territory, or if they want to continue having a presence on the EU territory. So this is a good example of the way forward. But how to force states to comply more generally? Well, for the first time, the European Union is considering linking rule of law conditionality to financial assistance or funding to nations in violations of rule of law principles. And I think this is very important. And I see the President nodding. This is extremely important. And the rule of law is probably the framework that is going to guide us in terms of what we can do within the EU and outside of the European Union. So the rule of law principles include all the legal and ethical safeguards previously discussed. So the way for international treaties or bilateral treaties or even bilateral conventions or agreements that already contain human rights clauses based on human rights due diligence could be applied to, for example, having privacy clauses and privacy due diligence obligations on whoever is dealing with privacy matters. So we could imagine the network of international organizations involved in the regulation of artificial intelligence, setting out in a coordinated manner the rule of law conditionality in the framework of artificial intelligence regulation, vis-à-vis financial and technical assistance to states in the field of innovation and trade, which is at the heart of globalization, and that race you mentioned. So that could be applicable to different areas of the world, different spaces, different legal spaces, such as the EU, but also North America, South America, or Asia. And it could be addressed not only to states, but also to stakeholders and to industry partners and developing countries. Developing countries could benefit from specific provisions for specific issues that need to be tackled. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of time for discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'm going to turn directly to, we have the privilege of having an actual head of state with us. So I want to turn to President Pahor and ask, there is very much a debate currently, these AI rules at the level of the European Union. I wanted to ask you simply, how does Slovenia see things? We also mentioned a really interesting idea here, which is to build in respect for these principles of artificial intelligence into rule of law. We know this is a hot topic on the EU stage right now. Should we say, well, part of rule of law, part of respecting European values is also respecting these principles on artificial intelligence. We have some questions from the audience, so let's leave some time for that. But I wanted to get your view on that.
Well, directly to your question, sir. The rule of law is one of the most important pillar of European Union. So I am much in favor of go this way to invite all countries, all 27, to be with this pillar, also as a condition for certain financial support or fiscal support, or I think you know what I do have in mind. So let me also say it's not the coincidence. My country is one of many among 27 that is participating in this Friends of Rule of Law initiative. So this is the basic answer to your question. Now, as far as this IE technology, we are already witnessing an ethical practice in using artificial intelligence. We have spoken about them today. The fact is, as usual, that technology is developing faster than norms and ethical standards. Our aim should be proper balancing of technological development and wider social well-being. We must use artificial intelligence to fight climate change and to improve democracy, and not let technology to hamper them. It is not only the EU that is thinking about it, it is also UNESCO with its Ljubljana Center, Council of Europe, OECD with its Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence, and so on. So new technologies are simply not value natural. We needed to be aware of that in order to be able to use them for or to strengthen our democracies. So let me finish by saying two things. First of all, this is very, very important political issue. It is not just technological issue. It is a very important political issue that, in my experience, is not debated enough. It's not debated enough. Number two, I think it's extremely important that this ParisPeace Forum has decided to debate it. And this I would like to use as an invitation to everybody in political class to be more aware of some very sensitive consequences going out of this issue for immediate future, also in framework of this pandemic and its consequences. I would like to thank you to be part of this panel. Thank you to everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks very much. So this is an open forum. There's lots of people watching us, and some great questions that are trickling in. And I want to go to this one and turn to you, Professor Russell, because I think this may be a bit of a brain teaser and an interesting question. So here we have someone who says, given the complexity of AI systems, a human overseer may not always be possible. Should we start to encode ethical principles into the algorithm themselves? Is that something that makes sense from your perspective? And I'm asking everybody to be brief because we've only got about 10 minutes to go.
Yes, I would say absolutely. And in many ways, this is the core of how we design AI systems in the first place. What an AI system is generally is a system where humans supply objectives, and then the AI system figures out how to achieve the objective and carry out the solution. And so, of course, if you put in unethical objectives, you're going to get unethical consequences. So you would like it to be the case that the AI system intrinsically is designed to have human benefit as its overriding principle. The problem is that it's actually very hard to know what we mean by human benefit. Of course, it varies by individuals, but there's just a very, very difficult barrier between our true desires for what we want the future to be like and our ability to turn those into mathematical descriptions that we can put into computers. So I've actually been arguing that we need to change the way we build AI systems so that rather than trying to optimize some fixed objective, they actually know that they don't know what it is they're supposed to be achieving. And then they, in a sense, enter into a lifelong dialogue with humans to try to learn better what it is that humans want the future to be like. So I think in the long run, the questioner is exactly right, that fundamental ethical principles are going to be built into the machines. But that doesn't make it easy. So there are fundamental ethical questions, such as how do you make decisions on behalf of many people who have different purposes and different interests. And that question has been an open question for at least 2,500 years. So putting the answer, putting the principle into the AI system is not as straightforward as you might hope.
Brings to mind Asimov's principles for robots. He had a few guidelines there. We have another question here, which may sound a little bit philosophical, but I want to turn to you, Professor Stéphanie Lollet, because I think there's a bit of a legal aspect here. Person asks, is it possible to have ethical AI? We say, okay, well, it's the machine, so perhaps the machine itself isn't ethical. It says, who is deciding these ethics? But I think what is in that question is, where do we start to attribute responsibility over the ethics? If we want to have machines that behave in an ethical way, algorithms that interact with us in an ethical way, where do we put the legal responsibility over those questions? And I know it's a hot topic, so again, we'll try to keep it to bullet points, but tell us what you think.
Thank you. So this is why I said before that I don't think that looking at the ethics of AI from only one perspective, be it the technological perspective or the legal perspective, we will achieve much, because we need to embrace an interdisciplinary approach. And I would like to go back to what the previous speaker just mentioned, that, you know, we have been discussing philosophically for the past 2,500 years at the very least. So why is there ethics in AI, or why should there be ethics in AI? It's basically a philosophical question which goes back to, you know, why should there be rules? Why should there be values in a society? Why do human beings belong to societies, and what does it mean to belong to society? So we go back to the principles, or the moral principles of a natural law, if you want, and why is it that we need a frame? So we do need a frame because we have an inconsistency, as the president mentioned, between, on the one hand, very aggressive commercial exploitation and innovation, and on the other hand, we all aspire as human beings to see a society, world society, developing in harmony. So that's the reason we are all discussing, and we are on the path of the philosophers of ancient Greece, Rome, and other communities and cultures. So you need rules so that society can function, and the vice versa, a society can only function with rules. So it's always the same issue as to what should come first. And this is why this idea of ethics by design, which is basically to embed or to build in ethical considerations into the mathematical formula, is one of the available options, although I understand the technological and fundamental difficulties with this. But I think we don't really have much of a choice. In terms of how we decide what is ethically correct, that is again a very open question, a very philosophical question, and which has to do with, of course, what modern societies respect as values. And this is why using the rule of law as the preferred value, the one that would act as an umbrella, is an interesting avenue, because of course the principles of the rule of law are promoted at all levels in the world.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Now here we've got another thorny one, and I'm going to turn to you, Bertrand, because I bet that this came up in your GPI working groups. Here's the question, which I'm going to summarize as follows. We want a lot of transparency about our algorithms. We want algorithms that we can understand and where there is someone to answer for it, a human being. However, this also raises security, or even quote, commercial questions, because control over the algorithm can be a security issue, or can be a commercial advantage that people would want to protect very much. So how do you approach balancing transparency versus security in algorithm? And this person mentioned GovTech, but I think we can spread that out to just about the whole question of algorithms.
Yes, another very interesting question. First, I think that the transparency issues are much more relevant for, let's say, public authorities. And so this is where we really want transparency. And so there are no commercial issues associated with the decision made by public authorities. For example, if you look at the work done by the AI Now Institute of Kate Crawford, you will see some suggestions and reports about how public authorities should be transparent to their users, and how AI systems should be transparent to their users when they are processed by public authorities. Now, for private companies, of course, yes, I agree. There are some private, but there are some, let's say, property issues. Some companies, as Stuart Russell mentioned before, are really looking towards tools that will support this desire of transparency, because their users want it. And so it might in turn be a commercial advantage. But I also, of course, agree that there is a big risk if you and you are not going to deliver to publicize all the data of everyone when you are running a business. So this is there's a balance to be found. I agree, and this is a difficult subject. As I said before, we are far from knowing how to solve all these ethical questions. So these ones that we are talking about of transparency and proprietary information are very difficult. There are some other very, very difficult questions to be dealt with, such as trust, such as energy used by AI applications, such as malicious attacks or adversarial attacks, and such as, let's say, as I said, interaction between users and systems. And so we, in fact, it's good for research because there's a lot of research to be done in order to be able to address these questions. And so the researchers are not going to define the political aspects or the ethics aspects, which are in the hands of lawyers, politicians, etc. But at least they can contribute by developing technologies that will help in making these decisions.
Okay, thank you. We're almost getting to the end of our session, which is unfortunate because we're having a great time. I want to ask one last question, and I'm going to direct this one to you, Gabriela Ramos. You worked on, have been working on international AI principles at UNESCO for the past 2 years. Here's a question from the audience. How do we manage to future-proof these principles and rules? As we know, this is technology, this is the cutting edge technology, is changing every day. How do you make sure things don't get outdated and that these rules will still apply, will still be good in 5, 10, or 20 years' time?
Well, let me first go back to something that I was meaning to say when I hear all the previous panelists. We humans are the ones that develop the technologies. And therefore, we are the ones that put the questions for the technologies to deliver via artificial intelligence instead of human intelligence, some answers. And we are already developing algorithms that are pursuing ethical objectives, like taking out malicious content. So, but we're focusing too much on the design and the conceptual frameworks for artificial intelligence. We need to look at the sector as a whole. And if you have 70% of the IPR being developed by just 200 firms in the world that belong to a few number of countries, how would you ensure that there is diversity? How do you ensure that women voices are put at the table when you have 85% of the developments of AI being done by male-only teams? And therefore, I feel this has to be a comprehensive discussion that is not only focusing on how do we do the technology, which is very important, and we're focusing on that, but it's also about the sector and the structure of the markets and what do they respond to, as some of my colleagues have said, not only for commercial profit, but also to deliver solutions to the challenges we're facing. So this is very important because sometimes we feel like we are us against the computer. No, the computer, we are the ones that are developing all these instruments. Now, how do we keep it moving is the original question of how do we regulate complex markets. And this happens with the financial markets. We're always lagging behind, and the mortgage crisis shows us that we were lagging behind. This happens with the electricity, with the telephony. It's always the same with natural monopolies. We're talking about natural monopolies. And therefore, we have the tools to do it in the competition toolkit, but we also need to upgrade the competition toolkit. So the fact is that by having this task in UNESCO of not only developing these principles and the instruments to implement it, but also producing the research and working with our countries to develop the legal instruments and also benchmarking, because there are countries that are very well ahead in terms of the legal frameworks, and there are countries that don't have the legal frameworks. The institutional settings is not only the law, it's also the institutions, the capacities of the government to understand and track. So we need also to invest in the capacities of governments. And this is a conversation that we will be having, because as long as UNESCO was granted this mandate to look at the ethical grounds, working with all of the, particularly all the representatives that you have here at the table, I think that we will need to keep on moving. The only point is that we cannot avoid the fact that is now the time to ensure that the rule of law online is respected as it is offline. And it's a time also to realize that the duty of care, as Russell mentioned, is in the hands of governments. So time is ripe, and we will be very glad to contribute to that effort.
Sounds like a couple of very future-proof concepts there. Thank you so much to all my guests, Gabriela Ramos, Bertrand Braunschweig, Stuart Russell, Professor Stéphanie Lollet, and President Borhut Pahor for joining us today on this excellent conversation. I have to say, we're getting a great deal of audience input of questions to people. What I would invite people is to continue the discussion on social media, hashtag ParisPeace Forum. The conversation will continue there. I'm sure you can reach out to the various participants of this discussion if you want further input. Excuse me, hashtag ParisPeace Forum 2020 is the place to go to keep discussing these things. I want to thank you very much. On my behalf, Nick Vinocour, tech editor for Politico. It was great to speak to you all, and I hope to continue the conversation next year and even sooner than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.